Hey everybody, welcome back to Greg's Grooves. We're here with another episode 3 of Overlooked Masterpieces. And we're going to veer away today from rock and roll and get into some new genres, or a new genre. Before I continue, I would just love if you would subscribe to the channel. It really motivates me to make more of these videos. I was amazed with some of the feedback and comments and likes and views on my first few videos. I'm still new at this, but I was just kind of doing it because I have some opinions on vinyl collecting and hi-fi enthusiasm, and I was just taken aback that so many people out there also wanted to share in the comments and watch, and I'm really moved. So if you like what you see, please subscribe. It really motivates me to make more of these videos. To know that there's like-minded people like you is very special to me. So thank you to all of you who have already subscribed. Thank you to everyone watching, and now let's get on with it. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we've already talked about how my favorite band is The Who, but a very close equal as far as my favorite musical artist of all time is the great John Coltrane. Didn't grow up being a huge jazz head or anything like that. My dad had a decent sized jazz collection, but I was always more taken with rock music at a young age. I mean, the Beatles blew my mind, and then The Who just blew the door open. I'm going to talk about in an upcoming video how my awakening happened with The Who, but we'll get to that in another video. I'm getting carried away here. And you're probably thinking, Greg, this is an episode of Overlooked Masterpieces, and you just held up A Love Supreme, the arguably greatest jazz album of all time and John Coltrane's greatest album. I'm not here to talk about A Love Supreme being an overlooked masterpiece. It's just a masterpiece and has been pretty much universally accepted as one. What I'm here to talk about is the album that I think is superior, and a little scared saying that because I know I'm going to get it's a hot take. I'm going to get some interesting feedback. But Crescent, the album that immediately precedes A Love Supreme, it's a better album. To me, it's a better album. So a little background. I mean, these are back-to-back releases on Impulse, and Crescent is recorded in late spring of 1964 and released that July, and then A Love Supreme is recorded in December of 1964 and released in January 65. And yeah, I mean, Crescent, when you see what's written about it on the internet, is often referred to as kind of like proto A Love Supreme, that some of the ideas that would become A Love Supreme kind of start their gestation in Crescent. And I think that take totally undersells the power of Crescent as a piece of art in and of itself. Obviously, it's the same John Coltrane quartet in both albums. You have Coltrane on tenor sax, McCoy Tyner on piano, Jimmy Garrison on bass, and the great Elvin Jones, one of my favorite drummers of all time, right up there with Keith Moon on drums. And yeah, so the common description of Crescent is that it's proto A Love Supreme, that some of the ideas that would become A Love Supreme, these spiritual songs, these tone poems, Coltrane kind of speaking through his saxophone in a way that is meant to emulate the human voice, kind of reaching out for God, that this really starts with Crescent. And I don't think that's fair, because I think some of those concepts are fully realized in Crescent while still maintaining a sort of melodicism that begins to deteriorate in A Love Supreme. Now, I've also seen Crescent described as more approachable than A Love Supreme, and I think that's also unfair, because I think there's moments in Crescent that are just as challenging. I don't think the drum thing is an easy listen. You have kind of an early take of John Coltrane doing the free-ish jazz drum and sax duet sort of music that he would develop later into the much larger free-form things that would happen with Ascension and those albums. The drum thing isn't necessarily an easy listen. It's a challenging listen. It's not a toe tapper, if you will. But side one, particularly Wise One, the second track, is Coltrane at his most gorgeous and melodic, and the quality of the recording, I think, actually exceeds A Love Supreme. Now, there's something that's a little bit gritty and earthy about A Love Supreme, which I think is appropriate for the music being played on that album. And then there's something sort of ethereal and mystic about Crescent that I think fits its mood. So that they both are recorded in a way that suits the music on the album. But yeah, Wise One might be my favorite Coltrane composition of all time. Bessie's Blues, just, pretty good standard blues. Not my favorite thing on the album, but the 1-2 punch of the title track followed by Wise One, Coltrane doesn't get much better than that for me. Flip over to side two, Lonnie's Lament is where we really see that proto A Love Supreme sound coming out. If you read a lot of the reviews of this album, a lot of the focus is on Lonnie's Lament, and I don't want to put it down as a track, but side two, while phenomenal on Crescent, just doesn't have the same sort of mystic power that side one has for me. I've often found myself going back to Crescent and Wise One again and again, and I am as guilty as anyone that, sometimes if I don't have the time to listen to a whole album, I'll listen to a section that really appeals to me, and those two tracks really appeal to me. And that's the other thing that I actually like about Crescent, and some might see it as sort of a knock on the album. It can be enjoyed without necessarily having to devote oneself to sitting through the whole album. A Love Supreme needs to be taken in its entirety. I really don't feel that the four parts work separately as standalone sort of pieces to digest. And I think that's intentional. I think A Love Supreme is a concept album. And like all concept albums, they just work better when taken in their totality. Crescent is an album with concepts, with a mood, with a theme. And I think that's a huge distinction in music, the difference between a concept album and an album with concepts. Now, what have I listened to more in my life? Probably A Love Supreme, because of its notoriety, because it's one of the albums my dad owned and played to death when I was growing up, because its place in the musical zeitgeist. But as I've gotten older, I've really come to appreciate Crescent as not just being proto A Love Supreme, but being an equally great work in and of itself. And to me, that's the definition of an overlooked masterpiece. Something that on its own is fantastic, but gets overshadowed by something that came either right before or right after it. I'm blessed to own this copy, which is an original Impulse stereo pressing. It is unbelievably gorgeous. I mean, this vinyl was just in pristine condition. I got it at a place called Long Island Vinyl Exchange, 15-ish years ago now. That place was awesome. I wish it still existed. If any of you remember Long Island Vinyl Exchange, tell me about it in the comments, but I bought so much of my collection there when I was a student at Stony Brook University. And yeah, one day I walked into the shop and yeah, someone had just brought this in and it looked like it had never been touched. It was with a copy of Sonny Rollins' Saxophone Colossus, which I also picked up, that looked like it had never been touched. I mean, someone had really cared for these records, and to this day, still one of my favorite purchases. I think I got this for $30 at the time, which was like a gargantuan investment when I was buying records for like $3 to $5 a piece typically, but no regrets. I've played the life out of this album. It still sounds amazing, and yeah, I cherish this pressing and I cherish this album, and I hope it'll no longer be an overlooked masterpiece, but seen for what it is, which is a piece of art just as worthy as A Love Supreme of your listening and your appreciation. That's it for this time on Greg's Grooves. Hope to see you again soon. Remember, like, subscribe. It really motivates me to make more of these videos. Till next time.